Chapter 3. The Whole Truth. Well, I am certainly wiser than this man. It is only too likely that neither of us has any knowledge to boast of, but he thinks that he knows something which he does not know, whereas I am quite conscious of my ignorance. At any rate, it seems that I am wiser than he is to this small extent, that I do not think that I know what I do not know. Socrates. What do you know? Really, what, with absolute certainty, do you know? Put aside all opinions, beliefs, and theories for a moment and address this one simple question. What do you know for sure? Or as Thoreau put it, let us settle ourselves and work and wedge our feet downward through the mud and slush of opinion and prejudice and tradition and delusion and appearance, that alluvion which covers the globe, through church and state, through poetry and philosophy and religion, till we come to a hard bottom and rocks in place, which we can call reality, and say, this is, and no mistake, and then begin. In other words, let's cut the crap and figure out what we know for sure. The cogito does exactly that, and it's very simple. The question is, what do you know? The answer is, I am. All other so-called facts are really non-facts and belong in the category of consensual reality and relative truth, i.e., unreal reality and untrue truth. Cogito ergo sum is the equation that proves the fact. But first, before we go on, let's ask what else we know. What else can be said for certain? Nothing. We don't know anything else. And that's the real point of the cogito. The importance of I am isn't that it's a fact, but that it's the only fact. I am is the only thing anyone has ever known or will ever know. Everything else, all religion and philosophy and science, can never be more than dream interpretation. There is no other fact than I am. The cogito is the seed of the thought that destroys the universe. Beyond the cogito, nothing is known. Beyond the cogito, nothing can be known. Except I am, no one knows anything. No man or God can claim to know more. No God or array of gods can exist or be imagined that know more than this one thing. I am. We can't avoid letting this topic drift briefly into the Old Testament. When Moses asked God his name, God answered, I am that I am. The name God gives for himself is I am. Note that I am is unconjugatable. It allows of no variation. God doesn't say, my name is I am, but you can call me you are, or he is. The cogito, the I am pronouncement, does not extend beyond one's own subjective knowing. I can say I am and know it as truth, but I can't say you are, he is, she is, we are, they are, it is, etc. I know I exist, and nothing else. Understood thusly, I am, a.k.a. God, truly is the Alpha and the Omega, the entirety of being, of knowledge, of you. The cogito is the line between fantasy and reality. On one side of the cogito is a universe of beliefs and ideas and theories. To cross the line is to leave all that behind. No theory, concept, belief, opinion, or debate can have any possible basis in reality once the ramifications of the cogito have fully saturated the mind. No dialogue can take place across that line because nothing that makes sense on either side makes sense on the other. Everyone thinks they understand the cogito, but nobody does. Descartes himself didn't. If professors of philosophy truly understood the cogito, they wouldn't be professors of philosophy. Alfred North Whitehead said that all philosophy is a footnote to Plato. But all philosophy, Plato included, is rendered obsolete and irrelevant by Descartes. Nothing but the subjective I am is true. So what's the point of prattling on? There's simply nothing else to say. The cogito isn't a mere thought or an idea. It's an ego-eating virus that, if we are able to lower our defenses against it, will eventually devour all illusion. Once we know the cogito, we can begin systematically unknowing everything we think we know, and unraveling the self we think we are. To understand the cogito at the surface level takes a minute or so. To let it devour you from the inside out can take years. Life is but a dream. There is no such thing as objective reality. Two cannot be proven. Nothing can be shown to exist. Time and space, love and hate, good and evil, cause and effect, are all just ideas. Anyone who says they know anything is really saying they don't know the only thing. Any assertion of truth other than I am is a confession of ignorance. The greatest religious and philosophical thoughts and ideas in the history of man contain no more truth than the bleating of sheep. The greatest books are no more authoritative than the greatest luncheon meats. No one knows anything. Disprove it for yourself. Anyone wishing to deny these statements about the meaning of the cogito need merely prove that something, anything, is true. By all means, give it a try. Smash your head against it. But it can't be done. The cogito is like a Molotov cocktail with which we can firebomb our own mind, safe in the knowledge that truth doesn't burn. This, however, is not the end of the journey of awakening. It's just the beginning. Chapter 4. A brief review. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. George Bernard Shaw. You can skip this chapter, but if you get confused later about the terms and concepts we're using and the relationships between them, come back here to find it all explained. If you didn't read damnedest and incorrect, you should definitely spend a few minutes here. The dream state paradigm. Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. Albert Einstein. The reality we seem to be experiencing and sharing is consensual reality. In no respect can it be distinguished from a dream. Spiritual enlightenment. If you have the choice between enlightenment and $1 million, take the $1 million. Because if you get the $1 million, there will be somebody there to enjoy the $1 million. But if you get enlightenment, there's no one there to enjoy the enlightenment. Ramesh Balsekar. The first thing to understand about the term spiritual enlightenment is that it's a clunker. The term, not the state, though the state has nothing to recommend it either. No one actually in this state would ever have decided to call it spiritual enlightenment, yet no other state merits such a title. Some would argue that certain non-ordinary states, such as cosmic consciousness and God consciousness, are worthy of so illustrious a designation, and if they were any more abiding than guffaw consciousness, I might agree. As it is, my former bond broker had more than 30 experiences of direct, timeless union with the God mind, and now he's just another John Q. Schlub pushing product and riding the train. So the way I see it, if it ain't abiding, it ain't shit. Just another ride in the park. Spiritual enlightenment is the state in which the self is free of all delusion, including self itself. Truth realization is another useful term to describe this state. Untruth, unrealization is more accurate, but less wieldy. Abiding non-dual awareness has its good points, too. The process of becoming enlightened is a deliberate act of self-annihilation. It is the false self that does the killing, and the false self that dies. A suicide in all but the physical sense. Because there is no true self to fill the vacancy created by the passing of the false self, no self remains. Hence, it is rightly said that no self is true self. It is not possible to knowledgeably choose or want spiritual enlightenment. To desire it is to misunderstand it. Ego cannot desire egolessness. One does not undergo the process of awakening out of love for the truth, but out of hatred for the false. A hatred so intense that it burns everything and spares nothing. Maya, architect of delusion. As soon as man awakens for a moment and opens his eyes, all the forces that caused him to fall asleep begin to act upon him with tenfold energy, and he immediately falls asleep again, very often dreaming that he is awake or is awakening. Gurdjieff. Maya might best be understood as the intelligence of fear. She is the keeper of the kept, the warden of the dream state. It is Maya who bestows upon us the miraculous and life-giving power to see what's not and to not see what is. It is Maya who makes the dream state possible and escape from it nearly impossible. She enables the dream state to exist, and if you wish to awaken from it, then it's her you must destroy, layer by layer. But don't live in metaphors. She's not a she, and she's not external to you. She's inside you, and those layers are the stuff of which your ego is made. Maya is the structural integrity of ego. Observe ego at work. Make a study of it. Dissect it. Reverse engineer it. Maya is not a person or a concept or a goddess. There is no way to understand what Maya is except to grapple with her. There is no way to know how deep she goes until you have gone that deep. In this war, Maya has every advantage but one: truth. Maya doesn't exist. Truth does. Human adulthood and human childhood, integrated state and segregated state. There is nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly. R. Buckminster Fuller. There came a time when the risk to remain tight in the bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom. Anais Nin. Human childhood is the ego-bound state. It is, in human children, a healthy and natural state. In human adults, however, it's a hideous affliction. The only way such an affliction could go undetected and unremedied is if everyone were equally afflicted, which is exactly the case. No problem is recognized, and no alternative is known, so no solution is sought, and no hope for change exists. We live our entire lives under false pretenses, in a case of mistaken identity. We subscribe fully and without reservation to our false selfhood, mistaking these two-dimensional roles we play for who and what we really are. In fact, we should be discarding these juvenile disguises in our early teens and embarking on life journeys of such superiority that, by contrast, the ego-bound life is not life at all. Think of a grasshopper caught in a spider's web, injected with a non-lethal poison, and then cocooned in layer upon layer of silk thread, kept alive for freshness but tightly bound to prevent thrashing or escape. It is still alive, but bears no resemblance to its authentic grasshopper self. That state of immobilized, narcotized stupor fairly represents the state of the chronic human child, misapprehended worldwide as a normally developed adult. And the spider fairly represents Maya. Most human beings cease to develop at around the age of 10 or 12. The average 70-year-old is often a 10-year-old with 60 years time in grade. Our societies are of, by, and for human children, which explains the self-perpetuating nature of this ghoulish malady, as well as most of the silliness we see in the world. The human child who has spent years at the same developmental stage understands growth as a process of solidification, of slow hardening into a rigid mass. In our world of human children, this mortification of the spirit is considered normal, healthy, and respectable. If we gauge societies in light of the developmental maturity of their citizens, we see very little difference, even between extremes. One society may be, on average, slightly further along than another, but the reality is that no society has advanced beyond the stage where girls play dress-up and boys torture frogs. If we lived in a society conducive to healthy, normal development, everyone would outgrow childhood in the personality structure at the same time we outgrow it in the physical structure. But there is no such society, and no reason to think that there ever will be. We are trapped in a state of self-aware simian consciousness. That is the human condition. Any of the negative things we might say about people in general, that we're greedy, corrupt, apathetic, stupid, hateful, violent, etc., are not symptoms of the human animal or the self-aware being, but of human childhood. Human childhood, though, is itself just a symptom of the one core disease from which all others radiate: fear. Fear is the natural and certain state of one who lives with eyes closed. Ignorance is the condition of thinking one's closed eyes are open, and that the world of one's imagining is the world as it exists. For a person to transition into human adulthood at an appropriate developmental age would require an actual rite of passage, rather than a merely symbolic ceremony, as it is sometimes observed. But it would take much more than that. It would require a society of human adults in which to occur. So it won't. That's the bad news. For a person to transition into human adulthood at an inappropriate developmental age, however, can and does occur. That's the good news. The individual who wants to achieve change and growth in his own life, who wants to move beyond the state of developmental retardation imposed by a developmentally retarded society, can probably do so. There's no saying what's possible for whom, but I feel pretty confident in saying that anyone who can understand their captivity and desire their freedom would find it possible to bring about a dramatic change in their condition. This is where the sincere seeker must make the most rigorous and concentrated effort. If we don't get this, we don't get anything. It's not enough to kind of get it. We have to grok it, live it and breathe it, make it our own personal religion and become fanatic about it. We must learn to see the difference between a human adult and a human child as easily and unmistakably as we see the difference between a 60-year-old and a 6-year-old. This may sound a little weird, but your ego is smarter than you, way smarter. And if you don't recognize that and respect it, you stand very little chance against it. I've seen many very insightful books by very brainy men and women who are experts on the subject of ego transcendence, but who, I could easily tell, had not transcended their own egos. The spiritual religious marketplace, which should be dedicated entirely to ministering to this all-important developmental advent, is, in fact, arrayed almost entirely against it. Ego doesn't need to be killed because it was never really alive. You don't have to destroy your false self because it's not real, which is really the whole point. It's just a character we play, and what needs to be killed is that part of us that identifies with the character. Once that's done, really done, and it can take years, then you can wear the costume and play the character as it suits you to do so. Now in the character, but not of the character. Human adulthood versus spiritual enlightenment. What is the greatest thing ye can experience? It is the hour of great contempt, the hour in which even your happiness becometh loathsome unto you, and so also your reason and virtue. Friedrich Nietzsche. The difference between adulthood and enlightenment is that the former is awakening within the dream state, and the latter is awakening from it. Shallow, early-stage adulthood is often mistaken for and sold as spiritual enlightenment. but it's not. It's just the first real glimpse of life, the death-rebirth transition from womb to world. The most important distinction to be made between these two states is that human adulthood makes sense, and enlightenment doesn't. The main benefit most spiritually inclined people can derive from having a clear understanding of what it really means to be truth realized is not so they can achieve it, but so they can dispense with it and reset their spiritual sights on something worthier than enlightenment, which is literally the biggest nothing of all time. Human adulthood is what everyone really wants, not truth or enlightenment. This is where you find all the good stuff and a lot less of the bad. You have to grow into it, of course, continue to develop and mature, learn and expand, but that's where all the perks are. Profound and abiding contentment, the ability to manifest desires and shape events, the ability to do less and accomplish more, find your true calling, connect with your higher self, never stub another toe, and so on. And human adulthood is what everyone, spiritual or not, religious or not, atheist or not, should be setting their sights on. This is what I've come to understand in my years of teaching and writing. If I were to give advice, I would recommend adulthood to everyone and enlightenment to no one. Human adulthood is life positive. Enlightenment is life negative. Human adulthood is the real prize. Spiritual enlightenment is pointless and meaningless, and should only be sought by those who have absolutely no choice in the matter. Simplicity. Veritatis simplex oratio est. The language of truth is simple. Seneca. The journey of awakening is, despite our endless desire to complicate it, perfectly simple. Anytime we get muddled, disoriented, feel weak in heart or clouded in mind, get our heads turned around by some spiritual sales pitch or philosophical argument or guru de jour, we need only return to simplicity. There is nothing to learn, nothing to know, nothing to practice, nothing to become. Focus and intent. It is impossible to imagine Goethe or Beethoven being good at billiards or golf. H.L. Mencken. The vast majority of spiritual seekers are motivated by desire, so the failure of their search is a foregone conclusion, as is amply evidenced by mankind's history of near total inability to find the one thing that can never be lost. How is it possible that something as simple as seeing what is manages to elude even our most devout seekers and our greatest minds? Because no one really wants what awakening really is. We may express a vague sort of desire to awaken, but we want a very specific kind of awakening. The kind that doesn't require us to leave our cozy dream state, or, better yet, makes it even cozier. We don't want to awaken from the dream. We want to dream that we are awake. The true desire that drives the process of awakening is more akin to a psychotic madness. It is a wickedly profound and protracted crisis, not the dreary little dark night of the soul the hucksters pawn off on the tourists. Many people hear the ringing alarm in life, the call to awaken, but what we really want, more than sex, power, fame, love, immortality, or money, is to hit the snooze button and go back to sleep. When life calls, all we want to do is pull the covers over our head and roll over, and, above all, keep our eyes closed. The last thing anyone really wants, whatever they might say, is to have their slumber disturbed. Surrender. One thing only I know, and that is that I know nothing. Socrates. To surrender is to relinquish the illusion of control, which initiates the death part of the death-rebirth process, which is the transition from the bondage of the womb-like segregated state to the freedom of the ever-expanding integrated state. No faith or belief is required to accomplish this act of surrender, only clear seeing. When one begins to understand ego and fear for what they really are, then this process becomes as easy and natural as dropping a heavy weight. Sadly, owing to the faux surrender popularized by pop Christianity, jailhouse conversions, and 12-step programs, this vital and necessary growth stage has fallen into disrepute and is widely scorned as the desperate act of the stupid, the frightened, and the weak. This is a clear example of how Maya operates in the world. The price of truth. A taste for truth at any cost is a passion which spares nothing. Albert Camus. The price of truth is everything. The price of truth is nothing. This is another way of stating the gateless gate paradox. From the unawakened side, the gate blocking one from enlightenment is enormous and impassable. Delusion fills one's entire field of view because it resides prior to perception. Once delusion has been destroyed, we can see that it never really existed. Ignorance. The greatest obstacle to discovery is not ignorance. It is the illusion of knowledge. Danielle Borston. There are two kinds of ignorance. One is the relatively benign kind, where we don't know or understand something. This kind is not usually a big troublemaker. If you don't know how to change the oil in your car, you hire someone to do it. If you don't know how to make lasagna, you buy a cookbook. If you don't know how to skydive, you don't jump out of airplanes. The other kind of ignorance is the perniciously debilitating kind. It's the kind where we think we know something we don't know, or that we understand something we don't understand. The former type of ignorance is what most spiritual aspirants waste their lives trying to address, never realizing that it's the latter that enslaves them. Spiritual autolysis. Thought must be divided against itself before it can come to any knowledge of itself. Aldous Huxley. To hold a pen is to be at war. Voltaire. Spiritual autolysis is a writing process that allows us to utilize the fullest potential of our intelligence by bringing the mind into the sharpest possible focus. Autolysis means self-digestion, and that's the purpose of this technique. Unlike journaling or keeping a spiritual diary, it's all about finding and illuminating the next obstacle to our progress. It is not concerned with finding answers, but questions. There are no answers to be found, only the questions that define our limitations. Understand the question, and you destroy the limitation. It is through courageous thought and clear seeing that delusion is destroyed. Everyone thinks they think, But when someone begins to truly think, surgically, unemotionally, destructively, they quickly see that it's not something they've ever really done before. It is by writing, by externalizing the thought process, by depersonalizing it, by standing back from it, and representing all sides in an organized and objective manner, that we are able to unleash an intellectual ferocity of which we are normally incapable and unaware. A good way to start is to write down a statement you're sure is true, and then try to figure out exactly why the statement is false, which, unless you have stated a negative, no belief is true, made a subjective observation, my foot hurts, or wrote the only true thing you know, I am, it is. Fear. Taking a new step, uttering a new word, is what people fear most. Fyodor Dostoevsky. Fear is the prime emotion of the eyes-closed state. All emotions are attachments, and the energy source of all attachments is fear. Fear of what? Fear of no self. The nameless, faceless dread of non-being. Not just fear of death, which anyone can deny or explain away, but fear of nothingness, which no fairy tale can fix. Gratitude. If the only prayer you say in your whole life is thank you, that will suffice. Meister Eckhart. Gratitude of a non-specific, all-encompassing quality, and tinged with a not unpleasant sadness, might be said to be the primary emotion of the truth-realized person and the mature human adult. It is this gratitude that comes in as fear goes out. Further. When you reach the top, keep climbing. Zen proverb. The word further is like a talisman, a power object. We must pull it out and gaze upon it after every battle. Every time we think we must be done, that we must, at last, have arrived. As much as it may seem otherwise, there's always further. Get up, dust off, and gird thy loins for the next fray. Carl Jung said he had to descend 1,000 ladders to arrive at the little clod of earth he really was. At each landing, he must have thought himself done until his eyes adjusted and he saw that there was yet another ladder to descend. If Dr. Jung had command of the word further, he would have known that there were more ladders still, and that a little clod of earth was infinitely more than he actually was. Whenever you're sure you've arrived, there's always further. The day may come when there is no more further, and you will recognize that fact, not with fanfare and ticker tape, not with radiant backlighting and choirs of angels, but with the bemused and unenthusiastic observation that you are done. Done means done.